Hello and welcome everybody to another edition of Good Writing. I'm your host Dakota Shane and I am pumped. I'm super excited today because we are going to be discussing our very first, but definitely not the last, work of James Baldwin and why it's good writing. And that is a short story by James Baldwin, probably his most popular. That and Going to Meet the Man. We'll talk a bit more about if you enjoyed Sonny's Blues, where else I recommend you go with James Baldwin. But just a quick background into who James Baldwin was. He was a very influential writer, essayist, and activist, most notably during the American Civil Rights movement. So he's very, very connected to that movement. Most famous works, I would say, would be his novel, Giovanni's Room, which we'll definitely cover on this channel. Absolutely beautiful book. And Go Tell It on the Mountain, another great one. And then his collection of essays, Notes of a Native Son. So definitely a prominent literary figure. And while the more I read of James Baldwin, the more that I get to know his style and the more works I read by him. As much acclaim as he does get in terms of historical significance, I don't feel like he gets enough acclaim as an actual writer, as a craftsman. In my opinion, just, personal taste. I know people, vary in what they consider the zenith of writing and what another person considers the zenith of writing. I think it doesn't get much better than James Baldwin personally. I think that his writing style is the perfect blend of accessibility, being able to read a story out loud, and people from all walks of life being able to understand that story, be impacted and moved by that story, while also being absolutely beautiful and prolific when it comes to prose. And we'll dive into exactly what I mean here. But let's dive into Sonny's Blues. So Sonny's Blues is a short story that revolves around the very complex relationship between two African American brothers growing up in Harlem. One brother, who is the narrator, is a high school algebra teacher. The other brother, Sonny, is a jazz musician and who also has a history of heroin addiction. So the narrative actually begins with the narrator discovering that Sonny, his brother, was arrested for drug possession. So this triggers a series of events going into shared past, going into their mother's warnings and memory, and the consequential different life choices that each took to get there. So this is just marked by tension, rising tension, falling tension, rising tension, falling tension. And as the story progresses, the narrator continues to grapple with that and struggles to grapple with his own prejudice when it comes to where his brother is in life and how he chooses to live his life. And it culminates at the very end into his older brother actually finally going to one of Sonny's shows and listening to him play jazz and listening to that. And this really leads to a moment of reconciliation between the brother and a deeper understanding of those struggles that he has gone through and that they're both going through as African American men in this time period. And so one thing too, just a quick summary with things, and then we'll dive into some passages and then key takeaways and how we can apply this to our own writing, is when I think about and if you've read it, let me know if you agree. If you haven't, I really hope this video makes you pick up a copy right away. Quick side note, I have this copy in front of me that I'll be reading from. So this is the 100 Years of the Best American Short Stories. If you're a short fiction lover, this is an absolute gem. So the editors, Moore and Pittler, it looks like, combed through from 1915 to 2015 and picked what they considered the best short story of each year. So Sonny's Blues by James Baldwin was considered the best in 1958, which is how I stumbled on this story. And that led me to Giovanni's Room and Going to Meet the Man and everything. But anyway, this is what I'll be reading through. But any way you choose to read or consume Sonny's Blues is great with me. But I've noticed that the short stories that resonate the most with me, that really stick with me, have this, the last few passages are just absolute climactic masterpieces. And I'm thinking of Snows of Kilimanjaro by Ernest Hemingway. If you haven't read that, that's another great one. We'll cover it on this channel. The 400-Pound CEO by George Saunders. I have actually covered that on this channel. I'll link the video if you're curious down below. The Lottery by Shirley Jackson, who we will surely be... Oh, that was a bad joke. We will definitely be covering in this channel as well. But these finishes that just lead and just leave goosebumps on you. And Sonny's Blues, boy, does it have that and some when it comes to those final passages in the jazz nightclub. So I'm actually going to read some passages from the text to really give you an idea, both to capture Baldwin's writing and also get us on the same page and set the stage a bit for the discussion. So the first passage I'm going to read is the opening. So this is the actual opening of the story where it goes right into it. I read about it in the paper, in the subway, on my way to work. I read it, and I couldn't believe it, and I read it again. Then perhaps I just stared at it, at the newsprint spelling out his name, spelling out the story. I stared at it in the swinging lights of the subway car, and in the faces and bodies of the people, and in my own face, trapped in the darkness which roared outside. It was not to be believed, and I kept telling myself that as I walked from the subway station to the high school, and at the same time I couldn't doubt it. I was scared for Sonny. He became real to me again. A great block of ice got settled in my belly and kept melting there slowly all day long while I taught my classes algebra. It was a special kind of ice. It kept melting, sending trickles of ice water all up and down my veins, but it never got less. Sometimes it hardened and seemed to expand until I felt my guts were going to come spilling out, or that I was going to choke or scream. This would always be at a moment when I was remembering some specific thing Sonny had once said or done. So talk about an opening right there. That gives you a taste of Mr. James Baldwin in all his glory. And it really just hits the ground running. And I think with short fiction, more so than the novel, the opening is just critical. You can't be too clickbaity because short fiction readers and short story readers are really, really smart because not as many people read short stories as novels. So the people who do read them are very, very attuned to customs and to traditional pathways, to quirks and trends and patterns. So being too hooky in the beginning could make readers roll their eyes, but not being hooky enough will cause people to question you right off the bat. So I think an opening that just gets right to it, tells you exactly what's going to happen, and you're immediately drawn in. Next, I'll read the passage towards the end of the story, and then we'll get into takeaways and the good stuff. Although this is all good stuff in my opinion, but I'll let you decide in my ASMR radio host voice. Then they all gathered around Sonny. Oh, I'll say this is when they're in the nightclub and Sonny is playing music. Then they all gathered around Sonny, and Sonny played. Every now and again, one of them seemed to say, "Amen." Sonny's fingers filled the air with life, his life. But that life contained so many others, and Sonny went all the way back. He really began with the spare, flat statement of the opening phrase of the song. Then he began to make it his. It was very beautiful because it wasn't hurried and it was no longer a lament. I seemed to hear with what burning he had made it his, and what burning we had yet to make it ours. How we could cease lamenting. Freedom lurked around us, and I understood at last that he could help us be free if we would listen, and he would never be free until we did. I'll just let that, I have goosebumps. Whenever I read this story, I get goosebumps, but and we'll talk about it a bit more, but knowing the weight of the situation here with African Americans at this time in America, which we'll discuss in more depth shortly. So that, I think, is a good segue into some takeaways from this text. One thing, and these will be why I think that this is good writing, and then I'll touch a little bit on how, if you're interested, if you're a writer, how you can apply it to your own craft. When I was trying to put my finger on how and why James Baldwin is so masterful with his writing, one thing that really stood out to me was he writes in a way that screams visuals. I feel like a lot of times the picture that he's trying to create almost supersedes the story, at least for that line. And a lot of famous writers do this as well, and noteworthy writers, Joyce probably most famously, as well as Hemingway. And I think Baldwin has to be put up there in that category when it comes to this. I think I'll show some examples here by what exactly I mean. One that we have here is a passage. So this is the narrator talking about African American boys like Sonny in Harlem. This is him describing it. Some escaped the trap. Most didn't. Those who got out always left something of themselves behind, as some animals amputate a leg and leave it in the trap. There's another one here that I think the visual just immediately hits you in the face. This is a conversation between Sonny and his older brother, the narrator. And as a matter of fact, it did cheer him up for a minute. "That's right," he said to himself, Sonny. "I forgot that." His face relaxed a little, but the worry, the thoughtfulness, played on it still, the way shadows play on a face which is staring into the fire. And I'll wrap one more here that I think is a great example of Baldwin's writing. And this is, again, describing boys in their neighborhood and what typically happens. And specifically with Sonny, this is as the narrator was reflecting on the news that he's heard of Sonny getting arrested for drug possession. "I was sure that the first time Sonny had ever had horse, which is heroin, he couldn't have been much older than these boys were now. These boys, now, were living as we'd been living then. They were growing up with a rush, and their heads bumped abruptly against the low ceiling of their actual possibilities." So, as you can see from those passages, or hear from those passages, the image is right there. It's stark. It is the focus of your attention, and it absolutely embodies the idea that he's trying to portray. You can physically see as you're reading these boys bump their heads on the ceiling of their possibilities. You can see the animal amputating their leg as they're ripping away from the trap. You can see the shadows on the person's face as they're looking at the fire, as their worries are still there, that thoughtfulness, that reproachfulness of existence, and their existence and reality is still ever present. And I think as writers, one way to really try to do this on your own, we can't all be James Baldwin as masterful as he is at this, although we can try, is a lot of times, and myself included, we as writers, as we're trying to think of a great metaphor, as we're trying to think of a great image, a simile, we really get caught up too much in the details. We tangle ourselves on these details rather than getting the image right. So when you're trying to describe an event, a feeling, start to brainstorm a list of visuals. So if you were trying to describe that situation of where you were talking to somebody and there's momentary ease, but you saw just a glint of, oh, I'm right back. I'm like right back in reality. Really start to brainstorm a list of visuals that accompany that. What's that feeling? What is that you're trying to see? And don't worry about getting it perfect. Think about maybe fog comes to mind, maybe steam, maybe darkness, maybe moonlight, maybe water, maybe murky water, maybe smoke, maybe fire, maybe shadows. And you start to see these things, and then from there it's more about doing the same thing a step further. So when you have shadows, start to think, okay, what creates shadows? And then you brainstorm a list there. Sun, light bulb, light, fire, and then there it is. I'm not saying that it's the easiest thing in the world, but I'm saying that a lot of times we probably look at beautifully written sentences like this and get intimidated and think that we can't do that, when in reality, this might have been what James Baldwin was doing. He might have been banging his head against the wall, trying to get that word perfect, that image perfect. So that's something that really sticks out to me about James Baldwin and his writing. The second piece that I think is an absolute superpower of James Baldwin that stuck out to me is the superpower to write both sides. The word gets thrown around a lot, but I really do think that the most important skill a writer can have is empathy. And I mean true empathy. I mean being able to see somebody, talk to them for 20 minutes, who knows if you agree with anything that they just told you, and being able to write a story that explains their point of view in a very non-judgmental way. And I think the best writers are able to capture that. So with James Baldwin, he talks about both sides, and both sides meaning the brothers, the narrator who took the straight route. He was like, look, this is the situation that we find ourselves in as Black Americans. You have to saddle up, bud. Like, there's no one coming to save you. We don't know if anything's going to get passed. We have to do this on our own. So buckle up, figure it out, get a job, go to college, become stable, and start earning money. And that you can feel that tension and of the narrator, of just like seeing his brother go down this path that he disagrees with, and you can feel it in everything that he says. And I think a lot of us have been there. If you've ever had a loved one who you see going down the wrong path and you try to steer them in the right direction and it doesn't work, that powerlessness is gut-wrenching. It's absolutely some of the worst feelings that you'll ever experience. So I think that he does such a great job of writing the narrator's point of view. And the narrator, another piece that I think he does well that embodies this principle is he talks about how he thinks that music has become an excuse for his brother Sonny for his lifestyle. So he talks about how jazz, like he keeps using this as an excuse to do these horrible substances that are going to make him go down the absolute wrong path that he doesn't want his brother to go down. So we see Baldwin write about this from the narrator's side. But then we also see him write about Sonny from a very empathetic way. And one thing that I think captures this moment is earlier on in the story, the narrator is talking to a boy about Sonny. And this is more than likely a street kid who might not be in the right path and everything. And his brother is just like, what is Sonny doing? Like, he wants to die. He's doing this stuff. It's going to kill him. He wants to die. And the boy looks at the narrator and he goes, he doesn't want to die. He wants to live. And that, I think, captures addiction in such a potent and short way, but a profound way. And for those who haven't struggled with some sort of addiction or known people who have, I think this is a lot of times misunderstood. A lot of people think that, oh, it's the addiction, that the substance, it's such a horrible substance and they keep doing it. It's the addiction, it's a disease. That's true, but the thing about the substance is it makes them feel good. It makes them give them reprieve. It makes them escape just for even 20 minutes and just puts them on cloud nine. You know, just candidly speaking, my family has a long history of alcohol abuse. And I personally, I've cut back a lot and I'm working every day for it. But I found myself going down a path of drinking too much. And you know what? It felt really good. It makes me feel amazing. And sometimes people don't like hearing that. People are like, well, you're just this, you're just that. Or like with heroin addicts and meth addicts and everybody and opioid addicts, it's like, what are you doing? You're killing yourself. No, they're giving themselves joy just for a little bit in a really bleak existence. So I think that it's really smart of Baldwin to insert that character, his speech, and it shows that Baldwin gets it. He understands that side of the story too. And in another conversation later on in the story, Sonny says to his older brother, you're just hung up on the way some people tried to deal with their problems. So he's telling the older brother, look, you don't have all the answers. Like, who the hell are you to tell me how to live my life? You're a school teacher. Like, you're living in the same neighborhood as I did. You didn't move out. We're in this situation together. And you're judging people how they try to escape this psychological prison. So I think that it really is a superpower to be able to write the other side. And I'll wrap this section up with a story that really, as I was outlining this episode and conversation, it came back to me in a flood. And funny enough, my AP bio teacher in high school gave this. We were in the unit of AP bio, or part of the class, where we were talking about how the world was created, how the universe was created. And Mr. Williamson, that was the teacher's name, was talking about how in this project, we're going to have to defend one side and explain how the universe was created. So he brought the class, he made everyone rise to their feet, and he said, whoever believes in creationism, you go to that side. All right, people filed over. Evolutionists, I don't know if that's the noun, but People who believe in evolution go to this side of the room. People rose up, they went to the other side. Undecided people went in the middle. And, people were like, okay, we're getting ready. Let's start to outline this project because we're going to have to defend this side. And he looked at the creationists and was like, all right, everybody, creationists, you have to defend evolution. And then he turned to the evolutionists and said, evolutionists, you have to defend creationism. And this was for a big grade for AP students who really wanted to get into great schools, who really cared about academics. So they took this seriously, and the talk about just flipping it on the head. And they really had to dig deep and see the other side of the aisle in as much as, high school students can, a non-judgmental way. So I think just something that comes to mind of how we as writers, we really need to be excellent at this principle. All right. So another thing that sticks out to me about Baldwin and why Sonny's Blues is so great is I think not just in this piece, but elsewhere that you'll find in your readings of Baldwin, I really do think he's the perfect exemplar of allegory and intertextuality. Intertextuality. I never can get that word right. And what intertextuality is the theory that, or the idea that no work, whether books, writing, songs, anything, exists in isolation. Everything, works in and of themselves, are speaking to other works. So I actually was first introduced when I was reading a book by Professor Thomas C. Foster called How to Read Literature Like a Professor. I'll drop it in the description. It's a great book. We'll probably cover it on this channel too. But he talks about intertextuality by saying that 99 times things can be traced back to Shakespeare or the Bible when it comes to allegory, when it comes to intertextuality. He talks about how Dante, Bible, how a ton of writers you'll hear Hamlet in there. You'll hear one of Shakespearean plays. And I think that a lot of allegory is too heavy-handed at times. I think that it can really erode into tackiness pretty fast. That might just be my take, but I think that a lot of times people will just slap on a tale from folklore of this culture, and then they slap it onto a sci-fi or cyberpunk type thing. Star Wars famously did that. But every story is great if it's great, and every story is great if you like it. So not saying that, I'm just saying that allegory, I find that it can degrade into tackiness a lot of times. But with Baldwin, the Bible is all over his work. The fingerprints of the Bible are all over his work. In Sonny's Blues, they talk about the cup of trembling, which comes from the Bible and really is a symbol of sacrifice and low times of the Black experience that he is talking about. And I'm trying to formulate this thought in a way that could be a takeaway for folks watching on how they can apply it to their own writing. I think what works about it is he's objective with it when he describes this act. He doesn't say it in any sort of way with undertones of this is how you should believe it, this is how it should be. The story is the story is the story, and the cup of trembling is a piece of that story to describe what they're going through. And it kind of just full stops there. And I think that's what works so well, is that piece of this is just a part of me as a writer. I grew up religious, which he did, and this is a part of me. So this is a part of my telling, my truth, my story. All right. The last takeaway that really stood out to me here is I just finished reading this book. I'll drop it in the description as well. We'll cover it on the channel. I know I'm saying that with like so many different things tonight, but it's by Frank O'Connor, who was an Irish writer. At the time, he was one of the most famous short story writers in the world, but also a famous literary critic. And this work that is probably his most notable work is a book called The Lonely Voice. And it is a dissection and analysis of the short story. And it actually comes from a series of lectures that he gave at Stanford in 1962, which he just packed the house because he was, the it guy of the short story of the day. And these very distracted students, a lot of stuff going on in the 60s, found their way to file in and everything. But anyway, one of his theses, I would say the thesis of The Lonely Voice by Frank O'Connor, is what makes the great short story writers great is the concept of what he calls a submerged population. And what he means by that is a population of people, a group of people that are often downtrodden, that are often overlooked, that are often in the underworld of society. And he compares the novel to the short story. And one of the ideas is the novel is a reflection of society because of its length. If it was not societal, it would devolve into either a boring storyline or a unrealistic storyline or something that just didn't work. That was just too outrageous. So it almost has to be logical is what I'm saying. So when I was reading this, I really was thinking of how Baldwin, his submerged population that he gives a voice to, is the Black American experience. And throughout this whole story, just the power of music, the power of jazz, the Black experience in America, how it gave a voice to so many people at such a rough time in history, in American history, and how it made me think of growing up. I was obsessed with jazz. I played jazz for like 10, 12 years, jazz trombone. Louis Armstrong, Ella Fitzgerald, Nina Simone, they were my favorite artists growing up. And I remember, and I don't know how apocryphal it is or not, but this Sonny's Blues really reminds me of how Louis Armstrong, his trumpet he called Satchmo, which is short for satchel mouth. And during that time, he was one of the world's most famous musicians, if not, top. Who was bigger than Louis at the time? Yet he still had to experience the same experience as a Black American, as an African American. And so he would use his instrument, his trumpet, to say all the shit that he wanted to get off his chest to all these whites in America. So while he couldn't talk and say, fuck you, like bleep you, like all this stuff, like you guys, like fuck all this, he would let his trumpet, Satchel Mouth, do the talking. So story goes that, he was just like that, but his trumpet was saying, like giving the middle finger to the white audience, or at least the whites in charge, and everything. So I think that really is felt leaps and bounds throughout Sonny's Blues. And Sonny actually talks about in the story how he wants to join the army to get out of Harlem, which just makes you a little queasy even thinking about that. The situation was so bad in his neighborhood, the place that he grew up, that he would rather, at a time where war was common, war could happen at any moment. This was height of the Cold War. I believe this might have been the Korean War, 1958. Am I right there? So that's not a light thing to say. And just talking about the passage that I opened up the video with and everything. So that is the takeaway, the last takeaway that I took from Sonny's Blues. We covered a lot. I hope that you found value in this conversation. And I'm going to wrap up with some related reading. and a good writing exercise. So there's a very, very, very optional exercise that I give at the end of each episode that puts the principles that we talked about for those who are interested in honing their craft a little bit in a fun way, puts that into practice. So some related reading. If you haven't read, or if you've read Sonny's Blues and you've loved it as much as I did, check out Giovanni's Room. James Baldwin, which I just realized I didn't even lead with, was an openly gay black man in America. Not only so the intersectionality that he experienced must have been something of another universe in that way. But Giovanni's Room is a love story set in post-war Paris between two men. So, and if you love these passages that I shared, if you love just beautiful prose, image-rich prose, check out Giovanni's Room because it's just replete with them. Page after page after page of just beautiful prose. Is the short story Going to Meet the Man? I will say, as this is one of his more famous stories, it's a really, really tough read. It is extremely violent. It's extremely vile. And if, just as a heads up, it's about a lynching and not that far into the distant past. So while I do recommend it as a story to read and consume, it's considered one of his masterpieces among many. It is just, it's tough. It's tough to read, but great nonetheless in the most tragic sort of way there. And also, too, I would love to hear your recommendations. So if you've read James Baldwin and you have anything, I'm still consuming a lot of him. I have definitely not read his whole catalog, but have fell in love with everything that I have read. So let me know what else I'm missing. All right, so for the exercise for today, I want you to think about a really strong opinion you have. So that could be pineapple on pizza. That could be LeBron versus MJ debate. Who's the GOAT? That could be something much more heavy. With that, doesn't have to be, something light like this. And think about it. Really take a minute to think about something that you have a strong opinion about. And once you have that, I want you to set a timer for 10 minutes and write a monologue from the point of view of a lawyer trying to defend the other side of that argument. So we're going to put forth our empathy card here. We're going to hone our inner James Baldwin here and defend the other side and really have fun with it. I actually did it before this and had a blast. All right, that does it. Thanks so much for watching today. Thanks for making me a part of your day. Wherever you are, whoever you are, I hope your plate is full. I hope your heart is light. And I hope before we meet again that you get lost in some good writing. I'll see you next time.